Hello and welcome back to the Design Insight podcast. Today we have Snigdha from HubSpot with us, and we are going to be talking about something really interesting. So before we get started, Snigdha, could you please give us a little intro about who you are, where you're from, and what you do?
Yeah, so my name is Snigdha. Hello, all. I'm a senior UX researcher at HubSpot. I am from the New York City area, and before HubSpot, I worked at two other companies, B2B, B2C, SaaS, and enterprise products.
So I would love to know about your journey into research and what actually prompted you to get into that, and what has made you stay in it. So what do you like about it?
Yeah, this is a great question. The reason why I wanted to explore UX at first, I didn't actually know about it throughout my school or graduate school. It was something that I learned about through my husband because he's a product manager. So he had a very sort of surface understanding of user experience research because it was kind of a growing field at the time. So I started networking in the community, figuring out the professional groups I could join and learning more about what the job was like from people. And the reason why I think it made an impression on me is because I was coming from academia, to do something more applied, something that could have an impact on people's day to day. And I was very interested in technology and design. I worked on a project with a group of designers and another researcher in between graduate school and applying for UX research jobs. And it was a human-centered design project, which was very interesting, around creating an experience to improve the transition for immigrants to this country. And so that kind of pulled me into the field, and I made a lot of friends along the process.
What are the different types of data that you encounter as a researcher, and um, is all of it the same? What can be used to make meaningful decisions by the designers, by the PMs, by the leadership? Because as researchers, and especially if we are working with large enterprises who have thousands and probably even millions of users, the sheer amount of data that is brought to the table is humongous. And it takes another level of skill set to kind of separate the diamonds from the coal, right? So maybe just throw a little light on that process. What are some best practices around it? How do you do it? And if you could share a few examples, that would be the icing on the cake.
Yeah, so there's so many different types of data, and the question is always where to begin. And I think the first thing in the process, as coming from a research background, I had that foundational understanding. I had to develop, the skill set on the applied field of how to work in business and in UX. But I think the common question across academia, across UX is, what are our research questions? And I think kind of getting together with the project team to kind of define that and put together some sort of alignment around that is the first step. Because you can go around kind of digging all types of data and without a goal in mind, and that could be exploratory, which does happen. But if you're looking to get something specific and make some really concrete decisions based on the data, I think it's important. It's an important first step to kind of align on what is it that we're looking for and why. Why do we want to learn this? How is this going to improve our product and our design? So that's my first step, and I can definitely get into more detail there.
I love it. I love it. Could you maybe just give us an example of what does align look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a pretty good angle to it. A lot of people may be already embedded into this process before you even joined, and they may be very tied to the product and the ways of thinking about it. So alignment could involve breaking away or breaking into some of those assumptions that people might have in the team. And so I have some questions that I might ask in the process of alignment. Just, what is it that we're looking to learn from this effort? Why is this effort important? And what are we going to do as a result of the findings that we get from this research? What are some specific like top 3 things that we plan to change in our product and our design? And that can really help because, you know, if you're doing research without a clear goal in mind, I typically start an alignment doc and I have some questions prepared that I'll ask the team, and then I'll fill in the doc as we're working together. And that'll be kind of our source of truth or our North Star throughout the effort, whether it's like a 3-week project or if it's something that's more foundational that can take more time.
That sounds great. So first step is alignment. What happens after that?
Yeah, so within the alignment, I want to get a good sense of our hypotheses, our questions. And then once I have that, I decide what are the best methods to address these questions. And so it could be qualitative methods, it could be quantitative, it could be a mix of both. Often it's a mix. So for example, in a recent project at HubSpot, we were looking to characterize this small but very important segment in our user base, which right now is not our sort of target market, but it could be like in the future. So there were kind of 2 different approaches we came to on this project. One was we want to be able to understand, hypothesize what are their needs today. And to do that, you could do it like 2 ways. One is to look at what features are they using in our product right now? How are they using them? And what are their, what kind of industries make up these companies in this segment? What are their characteristics of these organizations as well? So that was one angle, diving into some of the usage and firmographic data and generating hypotheses based on what we saw there. Because you can't really, looking at quantitative data, you can't really make the assumption that because people are using these features, they have these needs. It's hard to make that connection. And you need that qualitative piece to interview people to understand, why are you using these features? What are the gaps that you have? What, is there anything missing? So that's kind of our next phase that we're launching into now. We have done that usage analysis, and that informed the questions that we're going to be asking in interviews to our customers in the next phase.
What's after that? So once you have a set of questions to ask, so where does it go from there?
Yeah, so once you have that set of questions, you could do you've done that usage analysis. And hopefully coming out of that could be some recommendations to the team. Like for example, there were some findings in there that we had around users are using this particular feature a lot in this small segment that we're interested in. Why are they using that feature so much? Can we find out more about why it's so important to them? Because even, this small segment has very high usage of this feature compared to the rest of our user base. And, is there something unique about this segment that we can understand more and therefore drive value, provide them value through our product and services? Because right now they're not our focus. So those kinds of recommendations could come out of the research. Another thing to look out for with data is there's so many gaps in data. It could happen that you have a lot of data missing and there's data that's just not available, or data that you can't find the owner so therefore it's unclear whether it's the right data. So I think another important step in this exploration is to be able to identify who might be able to give you answers about the data when it's spotty or when there's data missing.
Absolutely. There are so many amazing points that you touched upon, Snigdha, here. One is recommendations to the team, right? Because if we are testing a bunch of hypotheses, it's very much possible that we might not get a completely black and white answer, and sometimes it's just in the middle, and you need to explore further. What do the design teams do with these recommendations? That's the first thing that I want to ask. And before I forget, it would be great if we can also touch base a little on accessibility of the data, right? Because that was one of my questions for you later on, about how do you make this data accessible so that someone who is looking at it maybe 1 or 2 years down the line still has access and still knows about what it is, who did it, for who was it done, the whole history, right? So I probably asked too many questions. So let's just talk about the first one, about recommendations and how they are and what is their life cycle like.
Yeah. So with the recommendations, it could depend on the effort, right? So the goal of this effort that I was just walking you through was more of a hypothesis generation exercise. So how can we know what questions to ask in the interviews, like, based on the feature usage that we're observing for the segment. So I think that was the first outcome of this. But interestingly, there were so many different teams at HubSpot that were interested in this data. So I had a deck that I had created based on the findings, with recommendations on each area that we investigated. And the growth team, for example, was interested in this work, because they're looking at they're looking at this particular segment as well, because in their product and design strategy, they're kind of focusing on the segment, and there hadn't been an analysis on this segment in this way before. So there could be cross-functional impact on the findings. I want to describe maybe another project that could be more like influencing early design decisions on a product, like where to go with it. So we did this project at my previous company where we were interested in this new segment of users. We weren't actually even sure, if they were a segment. We just saw that in some of our sales data, like our win-loss data, there were some developer customers coming in and purchasing our product. So we wanted to know, like, why are they purchasing our product? We don't really offer like an explicit solution for them or a tailored solution. So we engaged on this like discovery effort, basically, to understand the needs of this segment. So I interviewed a bunch of developers, and that project ended up actually giving us a lot, like we had a lot of recommendations come out of that helped our design team and our product team decide, what features we should prioritize, and based on the needs we observed. Like, for example, there were some pains that we saw around using the API and, the performance. So we worked on this feature to address this need and this pain point, which ended up really helping them with their speed and their performance and their API calls and being able to gather the data that they were trying to gather. So I think there could be very specific design and product recommendations as a result of research like that.
And it is just so beautiful when that happens, that the actual effort that's put into research is translated into design, and then into epics, and then into releases, and then into happy customers. So I love that cycle. Once you're done sharing it with the PMs and the engineering teams, how do you store it? How do you make it accessible to someone who wants to access it maybe 3 years down the line? And still make it easy for them to do so?
Yeah, this is a great topic. I'm very passionate about this. So I really like that question. I think it's not just about storing, right? You have to really engage your teams throughout the process to be able to have impact through the research. Because if you're doing research in a silo, basically without people like being actually part of the process, there's going to be way less learning and way less of their perspectives, like the team members' perspectives, shaping the recommendations and results that come out of the research. So I think the first step for me, whenever I'm doing research, as I mentioned, is to do the alignment. But after that is to figure out like a strategy or a process around socializing. So I have sort of like a plug and play process that I use at this point. I've been using it for years at this point. So, I've been able to kind of just use it at HubSpot. So I essentially have like a way for people across teams, not even within my department, but across the entire company to be able to sign up to see like the research. And I have like communications that I develop around it to like promote the messaging and share it out across teams. And so I have my project team attending a lot of the calls and helping to take notes. And I have like a process around that and some documents around that. And I have ways for the team to engage and kind of provide feedback along the way. So I'll bake in debriefs in the sessions. And I'll also have like a debrief with the core project team at the end of, all the sessions that we might run in the week. So I think that is the first most important exercise in terms of like communicating and having team members actually internalize what you're learning. We're all learning from the research. The second one is like being able to have more longevity to the research findings. So a lot of the research that I focus on and that I lead today is very sort of generative research. It's not maybe like concept tests as much. So that kind of research, the generative research where we're doing like interviews or shadowing observation type of stuff with users, that research has a lot more shelf life. Because it's not tied to like a UI or like a design, for example. It's actually diving very deep into the needs of the users and talking more about those topics. Like what other systems are they using and why? How do they decide to purchase software solutions? What kind of factors go into that? What organizational challenges do they have? So I think it's great to be able to have a system in place for team members to go back again and again and again and look at those findings. So we have in my company like a research repository and Airtable. That one I think is kind of new, so not a lot of teams have adopted it yet. But within my team, I tend to go with very simple. I try to simplify everything and make it easy. So I stick to like Google Docs and Google Sheets and stuff. So I have like a Google Sheet that I created. There's a new researcher who just started in my team this week. And so I'd created like a document that has a Google Sheet that has links to all of the existing research in her domain in that sheet. And the whole like team, the whole design and product team has access to that and has contributed to that document. So that's kind of the way that I tend to do it.
In my previous course, I have seen research kind of just buried in presentations, and it kind of just gets lost somewhere in SharePoints or in emails. And especially love the fact that the whole team has access to it, and not only that, they can even contribute and add on to it. So it just makes it like one live, large, living document.
Yeah.
Perfect. So another question, Snigdha, you actually did mention about shadowing, and you mentioned about interviews and research and everything, right? So how would you suggest someone do all that in a post-COVID era where people are kind of like, say, hesitant to come out? Can all of this still be done online over Zoom?
Yes, that's a really great question. I think it can. Personally, I've been like, I think it's a personal question whether people like to work from home or not. For me, I think it's great. But there obviously are limitations. Like when I was working in a financial software company, we visited in person a lot of financial institutions, banks, and like shadowed people at their desk. And, we were on the trading floor and stuff like that. We can't get that context right now. But, it also depends on the product and like what kinds of research you're planning to do. there's like ways that you can work around these limitations and get more kind of ethnographic context around what people are doing day to day, like doing a diary study. There's some tools out there like Dscout that can help do that and get more of that context that you might be missing by not being there in person into people's lives. So I think there's ways to kind of work around it, but yeah, it is a challenge and you have to definitely tailor your approaches.
So speaking about tools, Snigdha, are there any of your favorite always go-to tools for research? And if you could share some of them.
Yeah, absolutely. So I try to keep it simple, as I mentioned earlier, just because too many tools can be a problem. It's like the team may not have access to all the tools. They may not be able to get in there and see and collaborate and stuff. So I try to keep things simple. I use a lot of Google Docs and stuff like that. But in addition, we have Zoom up to run our research sessions. I had been using a coding tool before. It's called Atlas TI, but recently I found that using something like that can be, a challenge because other team members don't have access, as I mentioned. So I started doing my code, like basically tagging themes in my documents using Google Docs and then using a sheet to kind of just aggregate the information and stuff like that. I've used Optimal Workshop for tree testing, card sorting, and stuff like that. There may be ad hoc tools that I might purchase just for a given project. And recently I think we have access to some, recruitment tools and things like that at my company as well. And there's this video tool that I haven't actually started using it very much yet, but my team is really excited about. It's called Dscript. And so it lets you do some video editing and based on the transcripts as well, and it can automate the process a little bit for you. So it'll be easier to share out video clips and that are relevant to the teams.
Great. Some definitely go and check this out list for me.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. One more that I wanted to mention is I use Miro a lot and Lucidchart to do brainstorming and collaboration.
We are almost at the end of our interview, and there are these two questions that I ask all of our guests, and I would love for you to answer them as well. The first thing is, throughout your career, were there any mentors or were there any people, it could be mentors, it could be a colleague, it could be a manager, who have made like a substantial influence on your career, and what was it like?
Yeah, absolutely. So there have been several people. So I have a few friends that I've been kind of seeing throughout different occasions across the years, and they've been so generous with their time. We've had a lot of like Zoom calls, or like we met up in person in New York City before COVID, and some of them are very senior UX researchers in the field. So they were just very helpful in keeping things in perspective for me and helping me to learn how to kind of work with more like high level, like executive stakeholders and things like that, navigating those kinds of challenges. I also signed up for some sessions there was this website called UX Coffee Hours. And there were some research managers and folks in there. It's hard to get time slots, but I spoke with one person, and it's been really great to kind of keep connecting with her over time, because she actually works in like a business model that's pretty similar to the ones that I had been working in. And, she works with a lot of different challenging a lot of challenging projects with different stakeholder teams. So she has like a lot of insight into how to navigate those situations. And another person who's been very helpful has been my career coach as well, someone who I met by doing a course with a bunch of other UX researchers as part of this EPIC organization. It's called, it's a sort of an academic leaning group for UX researchers and other researchers. And then a few colleagues have been very instrumental. I think there was a PM at my previous org I worked on and a project with, and she helped me learn so much about the problem space, learning about this like customer base that we were interested in because she had a lot of experience with them, thinking more about, business and product strategy because she had really good experience. So it was great learning from her and other people on my teams who I collaborated with.
Amazing. There are so many questions that I want to ask you based on this list, but I will save that for maybe our next podcast round, especially around the career coach.
Yeah.
Bit of it. But so one last question, Snigdha. I know we are at the top of the hour. So what would your advice be to someone who is just starting out on their research career, or someone who is just restarting their research career after a gap?
Yeah. So I think it was extremely challenging for me trying to break into the field because I didn't have any relevant experience, or I had relevant experience, but I didn't have any applied experience in the field. So I think that can be really tough for people. And in this, in this whole job market right now, especially like people getting laid off and companies like downsizing, it can be even harder. So I think like persistence is key. Unfortunately, when I was making my transition, I had the advantage of being able to go to events in person. I think that was like critical in me meeting like basically most of the UX research community in New York City and keeping in touch with them. I joined the UXPA organization and I helped them. I was part of their board or their members who organized the events basically. And I met a lot of people from there who were like kind of foundational to my growth as a researcher. And I think today it's kind of harder to do that, right? But there's Slack communities that are for researchers, kind of trying to get in touch for informational interviews or like coffee, like Zoom dates with people to try to get their feedback. Coming to those meetings with questions is important, and like sort of coming with an idea of like what it is that you want to discuss rather than it could, those people are probably busy, like especially managers and senior level folks. So it's important to have a clear vision of like what you want to talk about with them. Any other advice? I think another thing is I had my first job as an intern actually. So looking for those kinds of opportunities, like coming out of school or something, like pursuing an internship to get your feet wet and decide, is this right for me? And having like lower stakes in like, learning, and it'll be a little bit less stressful as well. It could be. So I think that was a very good experience for me to do like a couple months internship as well.
So Snigdha, is there anything else that you would like to add, or is there anything else that I have not asked you that I should have?
No, I think this is really great. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this.
This episode definitely was one of the most valuable episodes that I have done so far, and there are so many takeaways from this, and especially all the tools and the resources that you mentioned at the end, where people can collaborate and find their tribe. I think that will add a lot of value, and that will continue to add a lot of value to people throughout their career. So that's great.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for sharing. Thank you so much for listening, and see you again in the next episode.